Most people spend their entire lives using money every single day without ever understanding what it actually is. Not what it buys, not how much of it they have, but what it fundamentally is, where it comes from, how it moves, and why the rules that govern it are almost never explained to the people those rules affect the most. And here's the strange part. Once you understand the real mechanics, a lot of the financial stress that feels deeply personal starts to look structural instead. It stops feeling like a private failure and starts looking like the predictable outcome of a system nobody ever handed you a map for. Today, you get the map. Let's start at the very beginning, because the beginning is where the confusion starts. Money, in its most basic form, is a technology for solving a problem, a coordination problem. Imagine a world before money. If you grew apples and you needed shoes, you had to find one specific person who happened to have shoes and also happened to want apples at the exact moment you needed the trade. Economists call that the double coincidence of wants, and it's every bit as inconvenient as it sounds. Money solved it. It became a universal medium of exchange. Instead of trading apples directly for shoes, you trade your apples for money, and then trade that money for shoes whenever you like. The apple farmer and the shoemaker never have to want each other's goods. They only have to trust the same money. And that word, trust, turns out to be the whole game. Money has no real value of its own. A paper bill is cotton and linen. The balance in your account is a number on a server somewhere. It's worth something only because enough people agree that it's worth something, and because they expect everyone else to keep agreeing tomorrow. That agreement is held together by governments, by central banks, and by centuries of institutional habit. This sounds abstract until you see what it means in practice. Money is a social contract, and like any contract, it can shift. Inflation is what it feels like when that contract quietly weakens, and each unit buys a little less. A currency crisis is what it looks like when the trust collapses all at once. And inflation matters to you far more than it first appears, precisely because it works in silence. Picture $10,000 sitting in a drawer. The number on the bills never changes, but if prices rise just 3% a year, that same $10,000 quietly buys around $7,500 worth of life a decade later. You didn't lose a single cent on paper. You lost a quarter of your purchasing power anyway. This is why money standing perfectly still is not actually safe. In an economy that drifts upward, standing still is a slow kind of moving backward. Understanding money as trust rather than as a fixed object changes how you read almost everything that follows. Here's something that genuinely surprises most people the first time they hear it, even people who feel reasonably informed. Most of the money in circulation was never printed by a government. It was created by banks through lending. When a bank approves someone's loan, it doesn't reach into a vault and hand over a stack of pre-existing bills. It creates new money. It writes a number into the borrower's account, money that did not exist a moment before. And in exchange, the borrower signs a promise to return that amount, plus interest, over time. This is called fractional reserve banking. Banks keep only a fraction of their deposits on hand and lend the rest. And in the act of lending, they expand the total amount of money in the economy. The Bank of England, which has been unusually direct about explaining this, published a well-known paper laying it out plainly. Deposits don't fund loans, it explained. Loans create deposits. The money supply grows when borrowing increases, and it shrinks when debt is paid down. Think about what that means the next time you sign a mortgage. The bank isn't handing you someone else's carefully saved deposit. It's creating new money against your promise to repay, and then collecting interest on money that didn't exist until you asked for it. That isn't a scandal. It's simply how the modern system runs. But once you can see it clearly, you understand why lenders are so eager to extend you credit and why the cost of that credit deserves your full attention rather than a quick signature at the bottom of a page. Why should this matter to you personally? Because it means debt isn't only a private problem you carry alone. It's literally the mechanism by which money enters the economy in the first place. And it means that interest, the price of using borrowed money, is woven into the foundation of the entire system you live inside. That's exactly why understanding interest isn't optional. It's the price of admission to modern economic life. Interest is the single most powerful force in personal finance, and most people only ever experience one side of it, the expensive side. When you borrow on a credit card, a car loan, a mortgage, interest is the cost. It's the fee a lender charges for letting you use their money now instead of later. The higher the rate, the heavier that fee becomes. Picture a woman named Rosa carrying $2,000 on a credit card at a 20% annual rate. If she only ever covers the interest, that balance quietly costs her around $400 every year. Carry it for 5 years, and she's handed the bank roughly $2,000 in pure interest. And she still owes the original $2,000. She's paid for the balance once over, and it hasn't shrunk at all. That's interest working against you, silently, relentlessly, in the background. Now, here's the other side, the side far fewer people ever get to feel. When you invest, that same force reverses and starts working for you. Returns compound. You earn on what you put in, and then you earn on what those earnings earned, and then it builds on itself again. $10,000 invested at around 7% a year, a reasonable long-run estimate for a broad, diversified index fund, grows to roughly $76,000 over 30 years, without you adding a single extra dollar, without any special skill, just time and compounding, doing the heavy lifting quietly in the background. The same $10,000 sitting in a basic savings account paying around 1% becomes about $13,500 over those same 30 years. Same starting money, same 30 years, a wildly different ending. The difference isn't luck, and it isn't genius. It's understanding which side of interest you're standing on, and then deliberately arranging your life to minimize the expensive side and maximize the productive one. Now, let's pull back and look at the bigger picture, because your personal money sits inside a much larger loop. Money moves in a circle. Households earn income from businesses and governments. They spend that income on goods and services, which flows back to businesses. Businesses pay their workers, who go out and spend again. Governments collect taxes and put money back in through services and infrastructure. Economists call this the circular flow of income, and it has one revealing property. When any part of the loop slows down, the whole thing tends to slow with it. That's essentially what a recession is. People get nervous and stop spending. Businesses earn less. Earning less, they cut jobs. The people who lose those jobs spend even less. the loop tightens on itself, and the fear becomes self-fulfilling. Central banks, the Federal Reserve in the United States, the European Central Bank across the Atlantic, try to manage this loop, mostly by adjusting interest rates. Low rates make borrowing cheap, which nudges people and businesses to spend and invest. High rates make borrowing expensive, which cools things down when prices are rising too fast. You feel this personally every time rates move. Your mortgage rate shifts. A new car loan costs more or less. The interest on your credit card drifts up or down. The enormous machinery of monetary policy eventually lands on your kitchen table. Consider a man named Tom, who never once followed economic news in his life. One year, his variable mortgage payment jumped by a few $100s a month, and he had no idea why. Nothing about his house had changed. What changed was a decision made in a marble building hundreds of miles away. Tom didn't need to predict that decision, but understanding that the loop exists and that his payment is wired directly into it is the difference between feeling randomly punished and simply seeing the weather coming. Understanding this won't turn you into an economist, but it means that when rates rise and your cost of living climbs with them, you'll understand why it's happening, and you'll make calmer, better decisions in response, instead of just feeling squeezed by something invisible. All of that is the system at large. Here's where it touches your daily life directly. Your personal economy runs on exactly the same principles as the national one. Income comes in, expenses go out. Whatever's left over, if anything, is your surplus. And what you do with that surplus quietly decides your entire financial future. If you spend everything that comes in, you're running at zero margin. Any disruption at all, a layoff, a medical bill, a transmission that finally gives out, instantly becomes a crisis because there's no buffer to absorb it. If you save but never invest, inflation slowly eats your purchasing power from the inside. Money sitting still in a near-zero account loses a little real value every year, even though the number on the screen never changes. If you borrow to consume, to buy things that lose value the moment you own them, you end up paying a premium for a shrinking asset. The car that cost $30,000 is worth maybe $22,000 a year later, and you're still paying interest on the full $30,000. But if you invest your surplus, you've placed it inside that compounding engine we just talked about. And over time, the engine does most of the work for you, while you sleep, while you live your life. Most people drift between these four without ever consciously choosing. They spend to zero for a while, then save a little into a stagnant account, then borrow for something that loses value, and quietly wonder why the years keep passing without progress. The shift that changes everything isn't dramatic. It's simply deciding, on purpose, which of those four things your surplus does, and then making that choice automatic, so it happens whether or not you remember to think about it. These aren't complicated ideas. They're simply the mechanics of how money moves. And now you can see them. Money is not magic, and it is not a mystery reserved for a clever few. It's a system, and like any system, once you understand it, you can navigate it, work with it, and bend it toward the life you actually want. The fact that most people never get this explained to them clearly is not a reflection of how smart they are. It's a reflection of what they were and weren't ever taught. You now have the foundation. So Picture the version of you a few years out who made every money decision understanding this map versus the version who kept guessing in the dark. Those two people end up in very different places, and the only thing separating them is what you now know. In the next video, we build directly on top of this. We're getting into why so many people feel broke no matter what they earn. And the real answer is almost never the one people expect. Subscribe to Wealthlings. I'll see you in the next one.